Sometimes justice wears a uniform, and sometimes it comes through a crackling radio transmission that changes everything. In a world where power can corrupt and the innocent can be crushed under the weight of arrogance, there are moments when the tables turn in the most unexpected ways. This is the story of Marcus Red River Thompson, a decorated military veteran whose calm demeanor hid years of specialized training and connections that reached the highest levels of command. It's about a judge who forgot that respect is earned, not demanded, and a courtroom moment that would be remembered for years to come. What happens when someone in authority pushes the wrong person too far? What occurs when years of military precision meet civilian arrogance? And how can a single radio call sign change the course of justice itself? This is not just a story about revenge or comeuppance. It's about dignity, respect, and the moment when someone who has served their country refuses to be humiliated by those who have never worn the uniform. It's about the hidden networks of brotherhood that exist among those who have faced real danger together, and how that bond can reach across ranks and titles when honor is on the line. Get ready for a story that will make you question everything you think you know about power, authority, and the price of disrespect. Marcus Thompson had always believed that respect was a two-way street, even after hanging up his military uniform 5 years ago. The 42-year-old former Special Operations Communications Sergeant had traded his combat boots for work boots, his tactical gear for construction equipment, but he carried himself with the same quiet confidence that had earned him the call sign Red River during his 15 years of service. The morning sun cast long shadows across the small-town courthouse as Marcus pulled his pickup truck into the parking lot. He adjusted his tie, a rare concession to civilian formality that felt foreign against his weathered neck. The tie was borrowed from his neighbor, and the suit jacket had been hastily purchased from a discount store the day before. Money was tight since the construction company he worked for had been struggling with delayed payments from city contracts. Marcus was here for what should have been a simple matter. A traffic citation that he believed was unjust, issued by an overzealous rookie cop who had mistaken Marcus's work truck for a commercial vehicle exceeding weight limits on a residential street. The violation came with a hefty fine that would eat into his family's grocery budget for the month. His wife Sarah had urged him to just pay it and move on, but something inside Marcus rebelled against the injustice of it all. The courthouse was one of those grand old buildings that small towns took pride in, with marble columns and brass fixtures that spoke of a time when civic duty meant something. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of floor wax and decades of legal proceedings. Marcus found his way to Courtroom B, where Judge Harold Pemberton presided over traffic violations and misdemeanor cases. Judge Pemberton had a reputation in the community, though not necessarily a good one. At 63, he had been on the bench for nearly 20 years, and power had not aged well on him. He was known for his sharp tongue, his impatience with defendants who wasted his time, and his particular disdain for what he called working-class excuses. Stories circulated about his harsh sentences for minor infractions and his tendency to lecture defendants about personal responsibility while showing little compassion for their circumstances. As Marcus entered the courtroom, he noticed the judge was already in session, berating a young mother about a parking violation. The woman stood with her head down, clutching a purse with worn straps, while Judge Pemberton's voice echoed off the walls with unnecessary harshness. Marcus took a seat in the gallery, watching as the woman agreed to a payment plan that would clearly strain her finances just to avoid the judge's continued anger. When his name was called, Marcus approached the defendant's table with the measured stride that had carried him through countless missions in hostile territory. He placed his folder of documentation on the table and stood at attention, not out of deference to the judge, but because military bearing was simply part of who he was. Judge Pemberton looked up from his papers with barely concealed irritation. Marcus Eugene Thompson, he read from the docket. Operating overweight commercial vehicle in residential zone. How do you plead? Not guilty, Your Honor, Marcus replied in a clear, steady voice. I have documentation showing that my vehicle was within legal weight limits and properly registered as a personal truck. The judge's eyebrows shot up as if Marcus had just declared his intention to represent himself in a murder trial. Mr. Thompson, do you have legal representation? No, Your Honor. I believe the facts of the case are straightforward enough that. That's your first mistake, Judge Pemberton interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension. Let me guess, you think because you can read a vehicle registration that you understand traffic law? Are you a lawyer, Mr. Thompson? No, Your Honor, but I am familiar with municipal codes regarding vehicle classifications, and I believe. You believe? The judge's voice rose slightly. Mr. Thompson, this is my courtroom, and I'll determine what you're qualified to believe. What's your occupation? I work construction, Your Honor. Heavy equipment operation and site management. Judge Pemberton leaned back in his chair with a smirk that made several people in the gallery shift uncomfortably. Construction. Of course. Let me paint a picture for you, Mr. Thompson. You're a construction worker who thinks he knows better than trained police officers and qualified judges. You're here wasting this court's time because you don't want to pay a simple fine that any responsible citizen would handle without complaint. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he had experienced during his service when dealing with incompetent officers who had never seen real combat but loved to throw their rank around. He kept his expression neutral, drawing on years of training in maintaining composure under stress. Your Honor, I'm simply asking that the court review the evidence. My vehicle registration clearly shows. I don't care what your paperwork says, Judge Pemberton snapped, cutting him off again. The officer who wrote this citation is a professional. Are you suggesting Officer Martinez doesn't know how to identify an overweight vehicle? Marcus opened his folder and pulled out his documents. With respect, Your Honor, I have the vehicle's weight specifications from the manufacturer, my registration documentation, and a receipt from a certified scale showing the truck's actual weight at the time of the citation. The officer's assessment was incorrect. The judge barely glanced at the papers Marcus held up. Put those away, Mr. Thompson. You're not qualified to determine the validity of police work. The citation stands. A murmur rippled through the courtroom gallery. Even for Judge Pemberton, this seemed particularly arbitrary. Marcus felt his jaw tighten slightly, but his voice remained level. Your Honor, are you refusing to review evidence relevant to the case? Judge Pemberton's face flushed red. Excuse me? Did you just question my judicial discretion? I'm asking for due process, Your Honor. The right to present evidence in my defense. Don't lecture me about due process, construction worker. The judge's voice had turned cold and dangerous. You come into my courtroom in an ill-fitting suit, thinking you can challenge trained professionals with your little folder of papers. This is exactly what's wrong with this country. People like you think you're entitled to waste everyone's time just because you don't want to accept responsibility for your actions. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, steady and controlled despite the rising tension. He thought about Sarah at home, probably preparing lunch and wondering how the hearing was going. He thought about his two teenage kids who looked up to him, and about the principles he had sworn to defend during his military service. Your Honor, Marcus said quietly, I served this country for 15 years. I've never asked for special treatment because of that service, and I'm not asking for it now. I'm simply asking for the same fair hearing that every American citizen deserves. Judge Pemberton's eyes narrowed to slits. Oh, here we go. The veteran card. Let me tell you something, Mr. Thompson. Your military service doesn't make you special in my courtroom. I've seen dozens of veterans come through here thinking their uniform gives them the right to disrespect civilian authority. Well, it doesn't work that way here. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. In all his years of service, through multiple deployments and dangerous missions, he had never encountered the level of casual disrespect he was experiencing now. Not from enemy combatants, not from hostile locals, and certainly not from the very citizens he had sworn to protect. I'm not playing the veteran card, Your Honor. I'm simply stating that I understand what it means to serve with honor and integrity. I know what it means to follow proper procedures and to treat people with basic human dignity. The judge's face was now purple with rage. How dare you suggest that I lack integrity or dignity? You're a construction worker with delusions of grandeur, standing in my courtroom lecturing me about honor? The fine is doubled. $2,000, payable immediately, or you can spend 30 days in county jail thinking about respect. The gasp from the gallery was audible this time. Even the court clerk looked shocked at the arbitrary increase in punishment. Marcus stood perfectly still, his mind racing through his options. $2,000 might as well have been $20,000 for his family's current financial situation. 30 days in jail would cost him his job and, potentially, his home. But something else was happening in Marcus's mind. He was remembering radio procedures, communication protocols, and a network of connections that Judge Pemberton couldn't possibly imagine. Marcus reached slowly into his jacket pocket and pulled out his cell phone. "What do you think you're doing?" Judge Pemberton barked. "Put that away immediately." Marcus looked down at his phone, then back up at the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to make a phone call." "This isn't jail, Mr. Thompson. You don't get phone calls in my courtroom. Put that device away or I'll hold you in contempt." Marcus's thumb moved across his phone screen with practiced precision. He wasn't calling a lawyer or a friend. He was accessing an encrypted communication app that very few civilians even knew existed. An app that connected him to a network of active duty and retired military personnel who had served in specialized units across all branches of service. His finger hovered over a specific contact entry. The name read simply Red River Network, but Marcus knew that activating this contact would send a priority message to every member of his former unit, as well as their extended network of brothers and sisters in arms. It was a network that included everyone from enlisted personnel to Pentagon staff officers, from retired sergeants to active duty generals. Marcus had never used this network for personal matters. It was intended for emergencies, for situations where military personnel or veterans needed help that couldn't be obtained through normal channels. But, as he stood in that courtroom, facing a judge who seemed to take pleasure in humiliating those who had served their country, Marcus realized that this might qualify as exactly the kind of emergency the network was designed for. He thought about all the other veterans who might have stood in this same spot, facing this same judge's contempt and abuse. He thought about the young mother who had been berated earlier, and wondered if she might have been a military spouse dealing with deployments and hardships that Judge Pemberton couldn't begin to understand. The judge was still talking, threatening more penalties and jail time, but Marcus was no longer listening to the words. He was listening to something else, something deeper. The voice of every drill sergeant who had taught him never to abandon a fellow soldier. The echo of every oath he had taken to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The quiet whisper of integrity that had guided him through the darkest moments of his service. Marcus lifted his phone and, with steady fingers, typed a brief message, Red River requesting immediate support. Civilian authority abusing veterans in municipal court. Judge Harold Pemberton, Courtroom B, Downtown Municipal Courthouse. Situation escalating. He hit send and put the phone back in his pocket. Judge Pemberton had noticed the phone activity and was now shouting about contempt of court, but his words seemed to fade into background noise. Marcus stood at attention, his hands clasped behind his back, and waited for what he knew was coming. The Red River Network had protocols. Emergency messages were forwarded immediately to duty officers who could verify situations and coordinate responses. The network included intelligence analysts who could research targets within minutes, communications specialists who could patch through to anyone in the military hierarchy, and logistics experts who could move resources across the country in hours. More importantly, the network included Colonel James Mitchell, Marcus's former commanding officer, who now served as a special advisor to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It included Sergeant Major Patricia Rodriguez, who had become the Army's senior enlisted advisor for Veterans Affairs. And it included dozens of other men and women who had reached positions of significant influence throughout the military and government structure. Marcus knew that within minutes, his message would be escalated through channels that Judge Pemberton couldn't imagine. Background checks would be run, service records would be verified, and decisions would be made by people who understood the true meaning of honor and service. The judge was still ranting about respect and authority when Marcus's phone vibrated once. A brief, encrypted message that only he could see, Red River confirmed. Support inbound. Hold position. For the first time since entering the courtroom, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Judge Pemberton was about to learn that some battles are fought on a much larger battlefield than he had ever imagined. And the war was just beginning. Judge Pemberton was just beginning another lecture about courthouse protocol when his clerk leaned forward and whispered something in his ear. The judge's expression shifted from anger to confusion as he glanced at a message on the clerk's computer screen. He waved his hand dismissively and continued his tirade. As I was saying, Mr. Thompson, your complete lack of respect for this court and its procedures demonstrates exactly the kind of entitled attitude that. The courtroom door opened with a soft click, and a man in an expensive suit entered quietly. He was followed by another man, this one in military dress uniform with ribbons that Marcus recognized immediately. The suited man took a seat in the back row while the uniformed officer remained standing near the door. Marcus's phone vibrated again with another encrypted message: local assets deployed. Federal oversight arriving in 30 minutes. Maintain current position. Judge Pemberton noticed the new arrivals but continued his speech without pause. Your military service, Mr. Thompson, does not exempt you from civilian law or give you the right to disrupt court proceedings with unauthorized phone calls. The man in the suit stood up and approached the bar. Your Honor, if I may interrupt. My name is David Chen, and I'm an attorney with the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. Judge Pemberton's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. I beg your pardon? This court is in session, and I didn't authorize any interruptions. I understand, Your Honor, but I need to inform the court that this proceeding is now under federal oversight pending an investigation into potential civil rights violations. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus remained at attention, but he could see the confusion and growing alarm in the judge's eyes. The gallery, which had been silent before, was now holding its collective breath. Civil rights violations? Judge Pemberton sputtered. What are you talking about? I'm conducting a routine traffic hearing. Attorney Chin opened a leather briefcase and pulled out several documents. Your Honor, we've received credible reports of systematic discrimination against military veterans in this courtroom, including denial of due process rights and the imposition of excessive penalties based on military status. Marcus's mind was racing. The Red River Network was more extensive and responsive than he had ever imagined. Someone had not only received his message and verified his situation but had managed to mobilize federal legal resources in less than 20 minutes. Judge Pemberton's face cycled through several shades of red. This is absolutely ridiculous. I treat all defendants equally in my courtroom. Mr. Thompson here was cited for a legitimate traffic violation and is trying to waste the court's time with frivolous arguments. Have you reviewed the defendant's evidence? Chen asked quietly. I don't need to review anything. The police officer's citation is sufficient. Your Honor, Chen said, his voice taking on a sharper edge, are you stating for the record that you refuse to examine evidence presented by the defendant? For the first time since Marcus had entered the courtroom, Judge Pemberton seemed to realize that he might be in serious trouble. His eyes darted between the federal attorney, the uniformed officer by the door, and Marcus, who continued to stand at perfect military attention. The evidence isn't necessary. The citation speaks for itself. Chen nodded and made a note on his legal pad. I see. And the doubling of the fine from $500 to $2,000? What was the legal basis for that decision? Judge Pemberton's mouth worked silently for several seconds. Marcus could see sweat beginning to form on the judge's forehead despite the courthouse's efficient air conditioning. The defendant was disrespectful. He questioned my authority and wasted the court's time. By requesting to present evidence? By refusing to accept responsibility and playing the veteran card. Chen looked up sharply from his notes. Playing the veteran card? Your Honor, are you suggesting that the defendant's military service is somehow relevant to your judicial decisions? The judge realized his mistake immediately, but it was too late to take back the words. Marcus watched as understanding dawned on Pemberton's face that everything he had said was being recorded and documented by federal authorities. Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time the message was longer. Red River, this is Colonel Mitchell. Situation verified. Full military legal review initiated. Senator's office notified. Media contacts alerted. Judge's history being analyzed. Stand fast, brother. The courtroom door opened again, and, this time several more people entered. A woman in a Navy uniform with commander's stripes. Two men in suits who had the unmistakable bearing of federal investigators. A younger woman with a press credential hanging from her neck. Judge Pemberton noticed the growing crowd and seemed to panic. Now see here, I don't know what kind of circus you people think you're running, but this is my courtroom and... Actually, Your Honor, said the woman in Navy uniform, stepping forward, this is a United States courthouse, and you are a public servant subject to federal oversight. I'm Commander Sarah Williams, Navy JAG Corps, and I'm here to observe this proceeding on behalf of the Department of Defense. Marcus felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with personal vindication. This was his military family responding to a call for help, demonstrating the same rapid deployment and overwhelming force that had made American military units legendary around the world. The federal attorney was still speaking. Your Honor, I need to inform you that this proceeding is being recorded and will be reviewed by the Civil Rights Division for potential violations of federal law. I would advise you to proceed very carefully. Judge Pemberton looked around the courtroom, clearly overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of what he thought was a simple traffic hearing into a federal investigation. His eyes settled on Marcus, who had not moved from his position of attention throughout the entire episode. Mr. Thompson, the judge said, his voice much quieter now, you mentioned you had evidence to present? Marcus stepped forward and placed his folder on the defendant's table. Yes, Your Honor. Vehicle registration showing personal use classification, manufacturer specifications for weight limits, and a certified weight receipt from the day of the citation. And you're requesting that the court review this evidence? Yes, Your Honor. Judge Pemberton's hands shook slightly as he reached for the documents. The federal attorney moved closer to observe as the judge examined each piece of paper. The silence in the courtroom was complete except for the rustling of documents and the quiet sound of the federal attorney taking notes. After what seemed like an eternity, Judge Pemberton looked up. Mr. Thompson, based on this evidence, it appears that your vehicle was properly registered and within legal weight limits at the time of the citation. Yes, Your Honor. The citation was issued in error. It appears so, Your Honor. Judge Pemberton glanced nervously at the federal attorney, who was watching every word and gesture. In that case, the charges are dismissed. Thank you, Your Honor. But Marcus didn't move from his position. He could see that while the immediate legal matter was resolved, the federal investigation was just beginning. The judge's earlier comments about veterans and his refusal to review evidence had been documented by multiple federal agencies. Commander Williams stepped forward. Your Honor, I need to inform you that the Department of Defense takes very seriously any allegations of discrimination against military veterans in civilian courts. We will be conducting a full review of this incident and requesting access to all recordings and transcripts of today's proceedings. The reporter in the back of the courtroom was taking notes furiously. Marcus realized that this story would likely be in the local newspaper by evening and possibly picked up by national military news outlets within days. Judge Pemberton seemed to be in full panic mode now. Commander, I want to assure you that any misunderstanding today was completely unintentional. I have the utmost respect for our military veterans and would never discriminate based on service status. The federal attorney looked up from his notes. Your Honor, you stated on the record that Mr. Thompson was playing the veteran card and that military service doesn't make you special in your courtroom. How do you reconcile those statements with your claim of respect for veterans? The judge's face went pale. Marcus could see him calculating the implications, probably thinking about his upcoming re-election campaign and wondering how this incident would play in a community with a large veteran population. Those statements were taken out of context. I was simply trying to maintain order in the courtroom. Commander Williams consulted a tablet in her hands. Your Honor, we've been in contact with the State Judicial Conduct Board, and they've expressed interest in reviewing this incident as well. They'll be requesting transcripts and witness statements. Marcus's phone buzzed with another message: Red River, full spectrum response activated. Congressional inquiry initiated. State judicial review requested. Veterans organizations notified. Local media alerted. This situation is now being handled at the highest levels. The realization of what had just happened was beginning to sink in. What had started as a simple traffic citation had escalated into a multi-agency federal investigation involving the Department of Justice, Department of Defense, state judicial oversight, and congressional attention. Judge Pemberton tried to regain control of the situation. "I think there may have been some miscommunication here today. Mr. Thompson, your charges are dismissed with apologies from the court. I hope we can all move forward from this unfortunate misunderstanding." But the federal attorney wasn't finished. "Your Honor, dismissing the charges doesn't address the underlying civil rights issues. We'll need to review your court's procedures, examine past cases involving veterans, and determine whether there's a pattern of discriminatory behavior." Marcus finally spoke. "Your Honor, if I may address the court?" Judge Pemberton nodded eagerly, probably hoping that Marcus would offer some kind of forgiveness that might help his situation. "Your Honor, I came here today seeking only basic fairness and the opportunity to present evidence in my defense. I didn't expect special treatment because of my military service, and I don't expect it now. But I do expect that every veteran who enters this courtroom will be treated with the same dignity and respect afforded to any other citizen." The uniformed officer by the door stepped forward. "Sir, if I may?" He addressed Marcus directly. "Sergeant Thompson, on behalf of the United States military, I want you to know that your conduct today has been exemplary. You stood your ground, maintained your military bearing, and used proper channels to address an injustice. You've honored your service and your uniform." Marcus felt a tightness in his throat. After years of feeling disconnected from his military service, wondering if his sacrifice had meant anything in civilian life, he was being reminded that the bonds forged in service never truly break. The federal attorney began packing up his briefcase. "Your Honor, you'll be hearing from our office within the next few days regarding our formal investigation. I would advise you to contact your attorney and prepare for extensive questioning about your judicial practices." As the federal officials began to file out of the courtroom, each one stopped to shake hands with Marcus and thank him for his service. The reporter approached and asked for a brief interview, which Marcus politely declined, saying only that he hoped his experience would help protect other veterans from similar treatment. Judge Pemberton sat behind his bench looking defeated and confused. The courtroom that had been his kingdom just an hour ago had been transformed into a federal crime scene, and he was now the subject of multiple investigations. Marcus gathered his papers and prepared to leave. As he walked toward the courtroom door, he heard Judge Pemberton call out behind him. "Mr. Thompson, wait." Marcus turned around. I want you to know that I made mistakes today. I let my frustration get the better of me, and I treated you unfairly. I hope you can accept my apologies." Marcus studied the judge's face, looking for sincerity behind the obvious desperation. "Your Honor, my concern isn't with personal apologies. My concern is with the next veteran who walks into this courtroom. I hope today's events will remind you that service members have sacrificed a great deal for the rights and freedoms that we all enjoy, including the right to fair treatment under the law." With that, Marcus walked out of the courthouse and into the afternoon sunlight, where he was met by several veterans who had arrived after hearing about the situation through the Red River Network. They formed an honor guard around him as he walked to his truck, a gesture of respect and solidarity that would be remembered long after the legal proceedings were concluded. The Red River Network had proven its effectiveness beyond Marcus's wildest expectations. But, more importantly, it had demonstrated that the bonds of military service extend far beyond active duty, and that veterans will always have brothers and sisters willing to stand with them when justice is on the line. As Marcus drove home to tell Sarah about his day, he realized that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with dignity, courage, and the knowledge that good people will always outnumber the bad when the stakes are high enough. The local news van was parked outside Marcus's house when he arrived home that evening. Sarah met him at the door with a mixture of confusion and concern on her face, holding their 17-year-old daughter Emma and 15-year-old son Jake close to her sides. "Marcus, what happened today? There are reporters calling the house, and some woman from the Veterans Administration wants to speak with you. Emma saw something on social media about a federal investigation at the courthouse." Marcus hugged his family and guided them inside, away from the curious neighbors who had gathered to watch the news crew. "It's a long story, honey. Let me explain what happened." As Marcus recounted the day's events, Sarah's expression shifted from worry to anger to something approaching amazement. Emma and Jake listened with wide eyes as their father described how a simple traffic citation had escalated into a multi-agency federal investigation. "Dad," Emma said when he finished, "you're like internet famous right now. Someone recorded part of what happened on their phone and posted it. It's already got like 50,000 views." Jake pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a video clip of Judge Pemberton's face when the federal attorney walked into the courtroom. "The comments are crazy, Dad. Everyone's talking about how cool you stayed during the whole thing." Sarah shook her head in amazement. 15 years you served, and I never knew you had connections like that. Who exactly is in this Red River network?" Marcus smiled. "People I served with, people they served with, people who served with those people. It's bigger than I realized. Apparently when you put out a call for help, it goes to everyone who's ever worn the uniform and sworn the same oath." The phone rang, and Sarah answered it cautiously. After a brief conversation, she handed it to Marcus. "It's someone named Colonel Mitchell." Marcus took the phone with genuine pleasure. "Colonel, it's good to hear your voice." "Red River, you magnificent bastard," came the familiar voice through the speaker. "Do you have any idea what kind of hornet's nest you kicked over today?" "I'm starting to get an idea, sir. Let me fill you in on what's happening. Within 2 hours of your initial message, we had Pentagon Legal reviewing the situation. Within 4 hours, we had 3 congressional offices asking questions. By close of business today, we had the State Attorney General's office opening an investigation into judicial misconduct." Marcus sank into his favorite chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the response. "Sir, I just wanted a fair hearing on a traffic ticket." "Son, you got a lot more than that. You triggered a full-spectrum response that's going to have consequences far beyond your case. Judge Pemberton is now under investigation by 4 different agencies, and his past cases are being reviewed for patterns of discrimination." Colonel Mitchell continued. "But, here's the thing, Marcus. Your situation wasn't unique. We've had the Veterans Administration looking into complaints about that courthouse for months. Turns out there have been dozens of veterans who've been mistreated in that courtroom, but most of them just paid their fines and walked away. Why didn't anyone speak up before? Same reason you almost didn't use the network. People don't want to be seen as complainers or troublemakers. They don't realize that sometimes it takes one person standing up to expose a much bigger problem." Sarah leaned over and whispered, "Ask him about the reporter outside." "Colonel, there's media interest in this story. How should I handle that?" "Very carefully. The story's already out there, so you can't avoid it completely. But remember that this is bigger than just your case now. There are going to be other victims who come forward, and there might be legal proceedings that could take months to resolve." After ending the call with Colonel Mitchell, Marcus spent the next 2 hours fielding phone calls from various officials, reporters, and veterans organizations. Each conversation revealed new aspects of the situation that he hadn't considered. A representative from the American Legion explained that they had been monitoring complaints about Judge Pemberton for over a year but hadn't been able to build a strong enough case to challenge him. Marcus's well-documented experience, combined with the presence of federal witnesses, had provided the evidence they needed. A reporter from Stars and Stripes, the military newspaper, wanted to write a feature story about the Red River Network and how military communications training was being used to protect veterans' rights in civilian settings. Most surprisingly, Marcus received a call from Senator Patricia Hayes, the chair of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, who wanted to use his case as an example in upcoming hearings about discrimination against veterans in state and local courts. "Mr. Thompson," the senator said, "your courage in standing up to an abusive judge has opened the door to addressing a much larger problem. We've been hearing complaints from veterans across the country about similar treatment, but most cases never get documented properly. Senator, I have to be honest. I'm not sure I'm the right person to be the face of this issue. I'm just a construction worker who got mad about an unfair traffic ticket." "That's exactly why you're the right person. You're not an activist or a professional advocate. You're an ordinary veteran who demanded basic fairness and refused to be intimidated. That's a story that resonates with people." That evening, as the news crew finally packed up and left, Marcus sat on his back porch with Sarah, trying to process everything that had happened. The quiet suburban street seemed surreal after the chaos of federal investigations and media attention. "Are you okay with all this?" Marcus asked his wife. "I know this isn't what you signed up for when I decided to fight a traffic ticket." Sarah took his hand. "Honey, I've watched you struggle for 5 years to find your place in civilian life. You've missed the sense of purpose you had in the military, the feeling that what you did mattered. Well, today what you did mattered in a big way. But what if this turns into a circus? What if it affects the kids or your job? Then, we'll deal with it together, like we always have. But, Marcus, I'm proud of you. You stood up for something important, and you did it the right way." The next morning brought fresh challenges. Marcus woke up to find his story on the front page of the local newspaper, with a headline reading "Veterans Stand Triggers Federal Investigation of Local Judge." The article was fair and accurate, but seeing his name and photo in print made the situation feel more real and permanent. At work, Marcus's colleagues greeted him with a mixture of respect and good-natured teasing. His supervisor, a Vietnam veteran named Frank, pulled him aside during the morning break. "Thompson, what you did yesterday took guts. I had my own run-in with that judge about 3 years ago. Parking violation that I tried to fight. He treated me like dirt, called me a troublemaker for questioning the citation. I ended up paying the fine and walking away feeling like less of a man. Why didn't you appeal or file a complaint? Who was going to listen? It's my word against a judge's. But you found a way to make them listen, and now maybe other guys like me won't have to go through that humiliation." Throughout the morning, Marcus received similar stories from co-workers, neighbors, and even strangers who had heard about his case. It became clear that Judge Pemberton's behavior toward veterans was part of a well-known pattern that had been tolerated for years simply because no one knew how to challenge it effectively. Around noon, Marcus received a call that would change everything. The voice on the other end was crisp and professional, with the unmistakable authority of high military rank. "Sergeant Thompson, this is General Patricia Morrison, Army Chief of Staff. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Marcus nearly dropped his phone. "Yes, ma'am." "Of course, General." "Sergeant, I've been briefed on your situation, and I want you to know that your actions yesterday have had impact far beyond your local courthouse. We've been monitoring similar incidents across the country, and your case has provided us with a roadmap for addressing veteran discrimination in civilian courts. Ma'am, I'm honored by your attention, but I'm not sure I understand the bigger picture here. Let me explain. The Department of Defense has been receiving scattered reports of veterans being mistreated in state and local courts for years. Usually these incidents are isolated and difficult to document. But your case was different. You had federal witnesses, you followed proper procedures, and you documented everything thoroughly." General Morrison continued. "We're using your case as a model to create a rapid response system for veteran discrimination incidents. The Red River Network you activated yesterday is being expanded into a formal program that will allow veterans to quickly connect with military legal resources when they face discrimination." Marcus felt a weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "General, what does that mean for me personally?" "It means you have a choice, Sergeant. You can return to your normal life and let the lawyers handle everything from here. Or you can help us build something that will protect veterans across the country from what you experienced yesterday. What would that involve? Training other veterans on how to recognize and document discrimination. Working with legal teams to develop response protocols. Possibly testifying before Congress about the need for federal oversight of veteran rights in civilian courts. Marcus looked around the construction site where he had been working, then thought about the judge's dismissive comments about construction workers with delusions of grandeur. Maybe it was time to show Judge Pemberton and others like him exactly what a construction worker with military training could accomplish. General, what do I need to do? First, you need to understand that this will change your life significantly. You'll be in the public eye, you'll travel frequently, and you'll face criticism from people who think veterans are asking for special treatment. Ma'am, with respect, veterans aren't asking for special treatment. We're asking for equal treatment. The same rights we fought to protect for everyone else. That's exactly the attitude we need, Sergeant. Are you willing to take this on? Marcus thought about Frank's story, about the young mother who had been humiliated before his case was called, about all the veterans who had walked out of that courthouse feeling diminished and helpless. Yes, ma'am. I'm in. Outstanding. You'll be hearing from my staff within 24 hours about next steps. And, Sergeant? Yes, ma'am? Thank you for reminding us all why we wear the uniform. As Marcus ended the call and returned to his work, he realized that yesterday's events had been just the beginning. Judge Pemberton's arrogance had inadvertently triggered something much larger than a federal investigation. It had awakened a sleeping giant, a network of veterans who were no longer willing to accept second-class treatment in the country they had sworn to defend. The construction worker with delusions of grandeur was about to become something the judge had never imagined, a force for change that would reach every courthouse in America. And it all started with one call sign, one network message, and one veteran who refused to be silenced. 3 weeks after the courthouse confrontation, Marcus found himself in a conference room at the Pentagon, surrounded by military legal officers, Department of Justice officials, and congressional staff members. The transition from construction site to the highest levels of government had been surreal, but Marcus had adapted with the same flexibility that had served him well during his military career. The Red River incident, as it had come to be known in military circles, had generated consequences that no one had anticipated. Judge Pemberton was now facing formal disciplinary proceedings from the State Judicial Conduct Board, a federal civil rights investigation, and growing pressure to resign from veterans' organizations across the country. But the judge's fate was just one small part of a much larger story that was unfolding. General Morrison had been true to her word about expanding the Red River Network into a formal program. What had started as an informal communication system among special operations veterans was being transformed into a comprehensive rapid response network for veteran rights violations. Sergeant Thompson, said Deputy Attorney General William Carter, your case has provided us with a perfect example of how quickly we can mobilize resources when veteran discrimination is properly documented and reported through official channels. Marcus nodded. Sir, what I've learned over the past few weeks is that the resources were always there. The problem was that most veterans didn't know how to access them or didn't feel they had the right to ask for help. That's going to change, said Colonel Jennifer Hayes, the Army's new coordinator for veteran affairs. We're implementing a system based on your Red River model that will give every veteran access to rapid legal response when they face discrimination. The meeting was interrupted by an aide who whispered something to the Deputy Attorney General. Carter's expression grew serious as he read a document that was handed to him. Ladies and gentlemen, I just received an update on the Pemberton investigation that I think you all need to hear. Our review of the judge's past cases has uncovered a pattern of discriminatory behavior that goes far beyond what we initially suspected. Carter consulted his notes. In the past 5 years, Judge Pemberton has imposed fines and sentences on veterans that average 40% higher than those imposed on non-veterans for identical offenses. He has consistently refused to consider military service as a mitigating factor in sentencing, even in cases where such consideration is legally appropriate. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Marcus felt a cold anger building in his chest. Sir, how many veterans are we talking about? Based on our preliminary review, at least 200 cases over 5 years. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in excessive fines, dozens of inappropriate jail sentences, and systematic denial of veterans' legal rights. General Morrison leaned forward. This validates everything we suspected, but it also raises the stakes significantly. We're no longer dealing with one judge's bad behavior. We're looking at a systematic violation of federal civil rights law. Colonel Hayes pulled up a presentation on the conference room screen. The good news is that we now have the tools to address this problem comprehensively. The expanded Red River Network has been tested in 12 other jurisdictions over the past 3 weeks, and we've already documented similar patterns of discrimination in 7 of them. Marcus studied the data on the screen, seeing patterns that reminded him of intelligence briefings during his military service. Colonel, this looks like a coordinated campaign. Are we dealing with organized anti-veteran sentiment, or is this just widespread ignorance about veteran rights? Both, unfortunately. Our analysis suggests that some of the discrimination is intentional, based on political or personal bias against military service. But a lot of it appears to be systemic ignorance about federal laws protecting veteran rights in civilian courts. The Deputy Attorney General stood up and walked to the window overlooking the Potomac River. Here's what we're going to do. Based on the evidence gathered through the Red River Network, the Department of Justice is announcing a nationwide investigation into veteran discrimination in state and local courts. He turned back to the group. We're also establishing permanent monitoring systems in jurisdictions where we've identified problems. Any veteran who believes they've been discriminated against will have access to immediate federal legal support. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility again. Sir, what's my role in this expanded operation? You're going to be our public face, Sergeant Thompson. We need someone who can explain this program to veterans across the country, someone they can trust because he's been through the same experiences they have. Over the following months, Marcus traveled to military bases, veterans organizations, and community groups across the country, explaining the new rapid response system and training veterans on how to recognize and report discrimination. The response was overwhelming, with thousands of veterans sharing stories of mistreatment that had previously gone unreported. One story in particular stayed with Marcus. In Tennessee, he met a Marine veteran named Carlos Martinez who had been sentenced to 6 months in jail for a minor traffic violation by a judge who said that military service had obviously failed to teach him respect for authority. Carlos had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and had been awarded the Silver Star for valor under fire. Mr. Thompson, Carlos said after Marcus's presentation, I never thought anyone would believe me about what happened. I thought it was just my word against the judges, so I served my time and tried to forget about it. Carlos, with the new system, that judge would have been under federal investigation within hours of your sentencing. And you would have had military legal officers in that courtroom to make sure your rights were protected. As the program expanded, Marcus began to see the broader impact of what had started with his simple traffic citation. Judges across the country were receiving training on federal laws protecting veteran rights. Court systems were implementing oversight procedures to prevent discrimination. And, most importantly, veterans were learning that they had powerful allies when they faced unfair treatment. The personal cost was significant. Marcus had to leave his construction job to work full-time on the Veteran Rights Program. The family had to adjust to his frequent travel and the constant media attention that came with being the face of a national movement. But there were compensations. Emma and Jake had become advocates for veteran rights at their school, organizing fundraisers for homeless veterans and educating their classmates about military service. Sarah had found work with a veterans organization, using her administrative skills to help coordinate the expanded Red River Network. 6 months after the courthouse confrontation, Marcus received news about Judge Pemberton's fate. The State Judicial Conduct Board had voted to remove him from the bench, and the federal civil rights investigation had resulted in a consent decree requiring extensive reforms in his former courthouse. But the judge's removal was overshadowed by bigger news. The Red River Network had documented over 500 cases of veteran discrimination in the past 6 months, leading to federal investigations in 23 states and resulting in reforms that would protect hundreds of thousands of veterans in the future. The program's success had caught the attention of Congress, where bipartisan legislation was being developed to formalize veteran rights protections and establish permanent federal monitoring of civilian courts. Mr. Thompson, Senator Hayes told him during a hearing on Capitol Hill, "When you walked into that courthouse 6 months ago, you probably thought you were fighting for a principle. What you actually did was expose a national scandal and provide the roadmap for solving it." Marcus testified before Congress about the need for comprehensive veteran rights legislation, describing not only his own experience but the hundreds of similar cases that had been documented through the Red River Network. "Senators, the men and women who serve in our military, take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. When they return to civilian life, that Constitution should protect them from discrimination and abuse in our courts. What we've discovered through this investigation is that too many veterans have been denied the very rights they fought to defend." The legislation passed both houses of Congress with overwhelming bipartisan support. Presidents signed it into law at a ceremony attended by Marcus and dozens of other veterans whose cases had been documented through the Red River Network. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when Marcus returned to his hometown courthouse for the swearing-in of Judge Pemberton's replacement. The new judge, a veteran herself, had specifically requested that Marcus be present for the ceremony. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Sandra Williams said after taking her oath of office, "I want to thank you for the courage you showed in this very courtroom. Your actions have made it possible for me to serve here, and they've made it safer for every veteran who will appear before this bench in the future." Marcus looked around the same courtroom where he had faced Judge Pemberton's abuse just months earlier. The same marble columns and brass fixtures were there, but everything else had changed. The court now had procedures in place to protect veteran rights, staff training on federal anti-discrimination laws, and direct communication links to military legal resources. Standing in the gallery were Frank from his construction crew, several other local veterans, and the young mother who had been berated by Judge Pemberton on the same day as Marcus's hearing. She approached him after the ceremony with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Thompson, I want you to know that my son is planning to join the Marines next year. Because of what you did, I know that when he comes home, he'll be treated with respect in places like this." As Marcus drove home from the courthouse, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this moment. A simple traffic citation had become a federal case, a call for help had become a national movement, and a construction workers' stand for dignity had become a permanent protection for millions of veterans. The Red River Network continued to operate, now as an official program with federal funding and military oversight. Veterans across the country knew that if they faced discrimination or abuse, help was just a phone call away. Marcus returned to construction work, but on his own terms now, running a company that specialized in hiring veterans and providing them with the stability and respect they deserved. The company's first contract was to renovate the very courthouse where his journey had begun, installing a memorial wall honoring local veterans and their service. The wall included a plaque that read, "In honor of all veterans who have served with courage abroad and stood with dignity at home. Their oath to defend the Constitution never expires." Judge Pemberton's legacy was a transformation he never could have imagined, driven by the very people he had tried to humiliate. His arrogance had awakened a force that changed the fundamental relationship between veterans and the civilian justice system. And it all traced back to one veteran who refused to be silent, one call sign that connected brothers and sisters in arms, and one network that proved the military's greatest strength was not in its weapons, but in its willingness to stand together when principles were at stake. The Red River still flowed, carrying messages of hope and justice to every corner of the nation. 2 years had passed since Marcus Thompson's confrontation with Judge Pemberton, and the ripple effects continued to spread across the American justice system like waves from a stone thrown into still water. The Red River Veteran Rights Protection Act had become the gold standard for civil rights legislation, and the network that Marcus had inadvertently activated had evolved into something unprecedented in American history. Marcus stood in the Rose Garden of the White House, wearing the same ill-fitting suit he had worn to court that day, now properly tailored and appropriate for the occasion. President Williams was about to sign an executive order establishing the National Veterans Justice Oversight Board, with Marcus as its first civilian director. "Ladies and gentlemen," the president said to the assembled crowd of veterans, military leaders, and congressional members, "we gather today to recognize not just one man's courage, but the collective power of American veterans to demand the justice they've earned through their service. The crowd included familiar faces from Marcus's journey. Colonel Mitchell, now promoted to Brigadier General, stood in his dress uniform near the front. Commander Williams from Navy JAG was there, having been instrumental in expanding the program to protect veterans in family courts and administrative proceedings. Even Frank from the construction crew had made the trip, wearing his Vietnam service medals on a borrowed suit. But the most important face in the crowd belonged to Sarah, standing with Emma and Jake, now college students who had both chosen to study law with specializations in veterans' rights. They had grown up watching their father transform from a frustrated construction worker into a national advocate, and their pride in his accomplishments was evident in their beaming smiles. The ceremony was meaningful, but Marcus knew the real story was in the statistics that had been compiled over the past 2 years. The Red River Network, now officially known as the Veterans Rapid Response System, had handled over 5,000 cases of suspected discrimination. Federal investigations had been opened in 47 states, resulting in judicial reforms, mandatory training programs, and systematic changes that protected millions of veterans. Judge Pemberton himself had become an unexpected ally in the reform movement. After losing his position and facing federal civil rights charges, he had undergone what appeared to be genuine personal transformation. He now traveled the country speaking to judicial conferences about unconscious bias and the importance of treating all citizens with dignity. "I was a small-minded man who let power corrupt my judgment," Pemberton had said during his testimony to a Senate subcommittee. "Mr. Thompson's courage in standing up to my abuse probably saved my soul as well as protecting countless other veterans from similar mistreatment." The redemption arc was satisfying, but Marcus remained focused on the systemic changes that would outlast any individual's personal journey. The Veterans Justice Oversight Board would monitor court systems across the country, investigate complaints, and ensure that the legal protections won through the Red River case were permanently enforced. After the White House ceremony, Marcus returned to his office at the Department of Veterans Affairs, where he maintained a simple workspace that reflected his continued connection to his military roots. The walls were covered with letters from veterans whose cases had been resolved through the rapid response system, photographs from court reform ceremonies across the country, and a framed copy of the original Red River Network message that had started it all. His assistant knocked on the door and entered with a serious expression. "Mr. Thompson, we've received a priority message through the network. There's a situation developing in Oregon that needs immediate attention." Marcus looked up from the case files he had been reviewing. After 2 years of handling veteran discrimination cases, he had learned to read the subtle cues that indicated whether a situation was routine or potentially explosive. "What are we looking at?" A Marine veteran named Jennifer Patterson was arrested during a peaceful protest outside a courthouse in Portland. She was challenging the treatment of her son, who's also a veteran, in a custody hearing. The arresting officers allegedly made derogatory comments about female veterans and used excessive force. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that always accompanied news of veteran mistreatment. "Do we have federal witnesses?" 2 FBI agents observed the arrest as part of their ongoing monitoring of the courthouse. "They've documented everything and are requesting immediate intervention." This was exactly the kind of situation that the Red River system had been designed to handle quickly and decisively. Marcus activated his secure communication device and began coordinating with military legal officers, federal investigators, and local veteran organizations. Within 30 minutes, a response team was being assembled. Within 2 hours, federal attorneys would be in Portland demanding the immediate release of Jennifer Patterson and launching an investigation into the arresting officer's conduct. Within 6 hours, the case would be national news, reminding everyone that veterans' rights were under federal protection. But, as Marcus coordinated the response, he was thinking about something deeper than just this individual case. The Red River Network had proven that veterans could protect each other when institutional systems failed. But, the real victory wasn't in any single case or investigation. The real victory was in the cultural change that had occurred across American society. Veterans were no longer isolated when they faced discrimination. They had a network, a system, and a guarantee that someone would stand with them when they stood for justice. The transformation had reached beyond courtrooms to affect how veterans were treated in employment, education, healthcare, and every other aspect of civilian life. Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from an unexpected source. Judge Sandra Williams, who had replaced Judge Pemberton, was requesting his presence at a special ceremony the following week. "Mr. Thompson, we're dedicating a new Veterans Resource Center in our courthouse, and we'd like you to be our guest speaker. We also have a surprise that I think you'll appreciate." The surprise turned out to be the unveiling of a bronze plaque installed in the courthouse lobby, commemorating the events that had led to nationwide reform. But the inscription wasn't what Marcus had expected. Instead of focusing on his individual courage or the judge's misconduct, the plaque read, "In honor of all veterans who have served with honor and stood for justice. This courthouse pledges to treat every citizen with the dignity and respect they deserve, regardless of their background or circumstances. True justice is blind to everything except the law and the truth." Below the inscription was a simple notation: Red River, 2024 to 2026, a network of justice. During his speech at the dedication ceremony, Marcus looked out at an audience that included dozens of local veterans, courthouse staff, federal officials, and ordinary citizens who had been touched by the story of transformation that had begun in this very building. 2 years ago, I walked into this courthouse angry about a traffic ticket and frustrated with what I saw as an unfair system. Today, I stand here grateful for the lesson that sometimes the most important battles are won not through force, but through the simple act of standing up for what's right and trusting that good people will stand with you. Marcus paused, looking at the bronze plaque that would remind future generations about the power of dignity and courage. The Red River Network proved that veterans never really leave the service. We continue to serve, not in foreign countries, but in our own communities. We serve by protecting each other, by standing up to injustice, and by reminding our fellow citizens that the Constitution we swore to defend applies to everyone, including those who took the oath. After the ceremony, as Marcus was preparing to leave, he was approached by a young man in a Marine dress uniform. The Marine introduced himself as Corporal Jason Patterson, Jennifer's son, whose custody case had originally sparked the Portland incident. "Sir, I wanted to thank you personally. Because of the Red River system, my case was reviewed by federal legal officers, and the discriminatory custody ruling was overturned. My mother's charges were dropped, and the officers who arrested her are facing federal civil rights charges. Corporal, that's what the network is for. How are things working out for you now?" "Better than I ever expected, sir. I have full custody of my daughter. I'm starting college in the fall on the GI Bill, and my mother has become a volunteer with the local veterans' rights organization. She says she wants to make sure what happened to us never happens to another military family." As Marcus drove home that evening, he reflected on the strange arithmetic of change. One traffic ticket had led to federal legislation. One moment of standing up to abuse had created a permanent protection system for millions of veterans. One call sign had built a network that would outlast all of them. The Red River still flowed, but it was no longer just a communication network. It had become a philosophy, a commitment, and a promise that no veteran would ever have to face discrimination alone. Marcus's phone buzzed with another priority message. A Navy veteran in Alabama was being denied veterans benefits by a local official who claimed that service members who hadn't seen combat weren't real veterans. The message was already being forwarded to the appropriate response teams, and Marcus knew that by morning, federal investigators would be reviewing the official's procedures and ensuring that the veteran received proper treatment. The system worked. The network held. And, somewhere in the country, another veteran was learning that they had brothers and sisters ready to stand with them when justice was on the line. As Marcus pulled into his driveway, he saw Sarah waiting on the porch with a bottle of wine and a newspaper. The front page carried a story about the expansion of the Red River program to protect military families as well as veterans themselves. "How was the dedication?" Sarah asked as she handed him a glass. "Good. Meaningful. But, you know what the best part was?" "What?" "I realized that we've built something bigger than any of us imagined. The Red River Network isn't about Marcus Thompson or Judge Pemberton or any individual case anymore. It's about the idea that service creates permanent bonds, and those bonds create permanent obligations to protect each other. Sarah smiled and raised her glass. To the Red River, then. And to the man who had the courage to send that first message. To the network, Marcus corrected. And to everyone who answered the call. As they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the suburban street in shades of gold and red, Marcus thought about the thousands of veterans across the country who were sleeping peacefully, knowing that if they faced injustice tomorrow, they would not face it alone. The Red River had become eternal, flowing through every courthouse, every government office, and every place where veterans might need protection. It carried with it the accumulated strength of everyone who had ever worn the uniform and sworn the oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And, in small towns and big cities across America, judges and officials who might be tempted to abuse their power now understood that veterans had their own form of power, rooted not in authority or position, but in brotherhood, dignity, and an unshakable commitment to justice. Judge Pemberton had unknowingly awakened something that would outlast him, outlast Marcus, and outlast everyone who had participated in the original confrontation. He had awakened the principle that in America, those who serve the nation will always have the nation's protection, and those who would abuse them will always face the nation's justice. The Red River flowed on, carrying the promise that no veteran would ever stand alone again.